So, what is the fallacy of relative privation? This is a fallacy that I think is one of the worst fallacies in existence. And not only is it one of the worst, but I think it's also, to be honest, one of the most common. I see it everywhere. So, what is the fallacy of relative privation or privation? I don't exactly know how to spell this word, pronounce this word. But the fallacy of relative privation is basically a fallacy wherein somebody says, well, because there's somebody else in the world who has it worse than you, therefore you can't complain about your circumstances at all. Alternatively, it could be called the starving orphans in Africa fallacy. The idea is like, well, somebody else has it shittier, so you can't complain. And it's like, of course, if you take this idea to its logical conclusion, even the starving orphans in Africa can't complain because it's like, hey, maybe there's some guy in North Korea who's in prison who's getting tortured all day by the government, and that guy actually has it worse than the starving orphans in Africa because all the starving orphans in Africa have to deal with this starvation, but this guy in North Korea is literally getting his balls zapped every day. He's being put through as much physical pain as possible deliberately by the authorities there because they're torturing him to extract information because they think he's a South Korean spy or whatever. And that guy has it worse than the starving children in Africa. So those starving kids in Africa have nothing to complain about. You see what I mean? Like, no matter what it is, like, there's probably somebody out there who has it worse. And also, it's just bullshit. Like, say, for instance, like, okay, if there's a woman who's, like, super rich and privileged her entire life, but then one day she happens to, like, get raped by some random stranger at knife point. It's like, okay, so because she's rich and privileged, she can't complain about that? You know what I mean? It's like, it really boggles my mind, like this idea that like you're not allowed to complain about something or you're not allowed to say that something is bad, something is an injustice, something is fucked up if there's something else that's worse or someone else who has it worse. It doesn't make sense at all. It's like the inverse would be saying you can't be happy about anything if somebody has it better than you, but nobody says that, right? So I guess some really, really nihilistic emo types might say that, but very few people would. My point is like the entire idea is fundamentally bullshit. But yeah, I see it all the time, like in discussions online. Anytime that somebody talks about a certain problem, inevitably somebody else is going to say, well, there's starving kids in Africa who have it worse, therefore you can't complain about that. And I see it in discussions about just about every issue imaginable. And I see both left-wingers and right-wingers doing it, or at least the person who's making the ostensibly left or right-wing argument. Like, I see both sides of the spectrum doing it. It actually comes up a lot in discussions of suburbia. Like, if anybody says anything bad about suburbia, be like, oh, just be glad you're not a starving orphan in Africa. Now you're complaining about the suburbs. And I see leftists doing it too, like, well, left and right. Like, I mean, I see people being like, "Oh, you're complaining about crime in an American city. Oh, try living in Nairobi or Lagos, and see if you'll see how you'll feel about American cities then." It's like, shut up. That's not a legitimate argument. It's not an argument. It's not an argument. It is not an argument. It's bullshit. It's a fallacy. It's a total fallacy. People really need to stop doing it. It just plays on people's emotions and it's dumb.